The Alpha King thought he was about to have an argument. Instead, his Luna ended the conversation before it began, and that terrified him. The Royal Moon Gala was the largest celebration the kingdom had hosted in years. Crystal chandeliers illuminated the grand ballroom. Musicians played from an elevated platform. Servants moved gracefully through the crowd, carrying silver trays filled with champagne. Nobles from every province attended. Military leaders gathered near the throne. Foreign dignitaries mingled among the guests. Everyone had come to celebrate the 10th anniversary of Alpha King Orion Blackthorn's reign. On the surface, it was a perfect evening. Beneath the surface, everyone was watching the same thing. Celeste Ravenglen. The woman stood near a group of nobles across the ballroom. Elegant, beautiful, impossible to ignore. And unfortunately, the Alpha King seemed unable to do exactly that. Nerissa noticed every glance. Not because she was jealous, because she was tired. There was a difference. For months, rumors had circulated through the kingdom. Celeste had returned. After 7 years. After disappearing without explanation. After becoming little more than a memory. The story should have ended there. Instead, it lingered. And tonight, that lingering became impossible to hide. Nerissa sat beside Orion at the royal table. From a distance, they looked exactly as they always had. A united pair, a powerful couple, a king and his Luna. Only she knew how much effort that illusion required. Across the room, Celeste laughed at something a nobleman said. Immediately, Orion's attention shifted. Again. The same way it had shifted all evening. The same way it shifted during previous banquets, previous council meetings, previous celebrations. The pattern had become painfully familiar. Nerissa sipped her champagne, said nothing, as always, because pointing it out wouldn't change anything. The problem wasn't Celeste. The problem was what Celeste represented. A question Orion never stopped asking himself. A road not taken, a future that never happened, and no matter how much time passed, part of him kept looking back. The realization no longer hurt. Not really. Pain required expectation, and somewhere along the way, Nerissa had stopped expecting. The orchestra finished one song and began another. Guests laughed. Conversations flowed. Then disaster arrived wearing pearls. Lady Vivian Thornridge approached their table, a woman famous for saying exactly what polite society preferred to imply. She smiled brightly, far too brightly. "Oh, your Majesty." The noblewoman laughed lightly. "What a fascinating evening." Several nearby guests immediately looked nervous. They knew that tone. Nerissa did too. Vivian glanced toward Celeste, then back toward Orion. Honestly, if Lady Celeste had never left, the ballroom seemed to grow quieter. Things might have turned out very differently. Silence, immediate, heavy, dangerous. Several nobles stared into their drinks. Others looked away entirely. Everyone understood the insult, not because it attacked Nerissa directly, because it suggested she occupied someone else's place. And now everyone waited. The proper response was obvious. Orion needed to shut it down. Immediately, firmly, publicly. A king protecting his Luna. Simple. Instead, he hesitated. Only for a second. A single heartbeat. A single moment. Yet Nerissa saw it. And once seen, it could never be unseen. The hesitation wasn't uncertainty. It was consideration. The possibility. The what if. The lingering question he never truly buried. Something inside her finally became quiet. Not shattered, not broken. Quiet, as though a door she'd spent years holding open had finally swung shut. Slowly, Nerissa smiled. A small smile. Gentle, almost peaceful. Then she reached for her Luna ring. The movement immediately captured Orion's attention. His expression changed. Confusion, concern, alarm. Too late. Nerissa slid the ring from her finger. The gold band glimmered beneath the ballroom lights. 11 years. Wars, famines, political crises, victories, losses, everything represented by a single piece of gold. The room became completely silent. Every conversation stopped. Every eye watched. Nerissa looked at the ring for a long moment, then placed it into Orion's open hand, and calmly said, "Give her my place instead." The ballroom froze. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. The grand ballroom remained frozen in stunned silence. The orchestra had stopped playing. The servants stood motionless. Even the champagne glasses seemed suspended in time. Because Luna Nerissa Valahart had just done the impossible. She had removed her Luna ring and handed it back. Orion stared at the gold band resting in his palm. For a moment, he couldn't process what had happened. The ring felt heavier than it should, as though 11 years of marriage suddenly weighed upon it. "Nerissa," his voice cut through the silence, low, uneasy. For perhaps the first time all evening, she had his complete attention. Unfortunately, it arrived too late. Nerissa looked at him calmly. There were no tears in her eyes, no anger, no desperation, no challenge demanding he choose. And somehow, that frightened him more than a public confrontation ever could, because she looked finished. Not upset, finished. The distinction mattered. Orion stood immediately. "Nerissa, that's not what—" She raised her hand. The movement was small, almost delicate. Yet the Alpha King stopped speaking. The entire ballroom noticed. Because nobody interrupted Orion Blackthorn. Not council members, not generals, not foreign rulers. Yet his Luna had, and he listened. Nerissa offered a polite smile. The same smile she used during diplomatic negotiations. The same smile she used while delivering difficult news. Professional, controlled, dangerously calm. You don't need to explain. The words landed like stones, because explanations implied confusion, and there was none. Not anymore. Across the room, Celeste stood completely still. Her face had lost all color. The former lover looked just as shocked as everyone else. Perhaps more, because unlike the gossiping nobles, she understood something important. This wasn't about her. Not really. She was simply the final piece of a puzzle that had been falling apart for years. The silence stretched, uncomfortable, unforgiving. Then Nerissa stepped away from the royal table. One step, then another. The crowd instinctively moved aside, creating a path. Nobody dared stop her. Nobody knew how. Orion tightened his grip on the ring. A strange panic settled inside his chest. "Nerissa." This time, his voice sounded sharper, more urgent. She paused, not turning around, just enough to acknowledge she'd heard him. For a brief moment, hope flickered inside him. Then she spoke, quietly, without looking back. "I hope she makes you happy." The statement wasn't bitter. That made it worse, because bitterness suggested unfinished feelings. This sounded like acceptance, and acceptance felt alarmingly permanent. A second later, she continued walking. The ballroom remained silent until the doors closed behind her. Only then did people begin breathing again. Only then did whispers start. The scandal would spread through the kingdom before midnight. Everyone knew it, but Nerissa no longer cared, because for the first time in years, the opinions of strangers felt irrelevant. The palace corridors were empty when she returned to her chambers. Moonlight spilled across polished floors. The familiar rooms greeted her in perfect silence. Nerissa closed the door behind her, then leaned against it, waiting, expecting grief, expecting heartbreak, expecting something. Nothing came, only relief, a quiet, unexpected relief. Slowly, she crossed the room and opened her wardrobe. The decision had already been made. Tonight merely provided the final confirmation. She packed efficiently. Practical clothing, travel supplies, personal journals, a few treasured books. Nothing more. The jewels remained. The gowns remained. The expensive gifts remained. Every symbol of royal life stayed exactly where it belonged, because those things never truly belonged to her, not in the way people assumed. Hours passed. The palace slept. The kingdom celebrated. And Nerissa prepared to leave. By dawn, one travel bag sat beside the door. Everything she intended to take fit inside it. 11 years reduced to a single bag. The thought should have saddened her. Instead, it felt honest. Before leaving, she looked around the room one final time. The crown rested untouched. The royal seal remained on her desk. Every symbol of power remained exactly where she found it. Then she turned away, without a letter, without a farewell, without asking anyone's permission. As the first rays of sunlight touched the horizon, Luna Nerissa Valahart walked out of the palace and never looked back. Hours later, the kingdom woke to discover something astonishing. The Luna was gone. The first problem appeared 10 days after Nerissa left. At first, nobody considered it unusual. Trade disputes happened all the time. Merchants argued. Contracts required revision. Regional officials complained. Such matters were simply part of governing a kingdom. Then the dispute remained unresolved, and another one appeared. Then another. Soon, 3 separate trade negotiations stalled simultaneously. The royal council grew frustrated. The merchants grew impatient. And everyone kept asking the same question. Has the Luna reviewed it? The answer was always the same. No, because the Luna wasn't there. At first, Orion assumed his advisors would handle the situation. That was their job, wasn't it? Unfortunately, the advisors seemed increasingly lost. The realization arrived slowly. Then all at once. Many of those negotiations had never actually reached the council before. Nerissa handled them quietly, efficiently, before they became problems. The discovery unsettled him, because he couldn't remember ever asking her to do that. She simply had. For years, without complaint, without recognition, without making certain everyone knew about it. She solved problems and moved on. The kingdom benefited, and nobody noticed, including him, especially him. The second crisis arrived a week later. A charitable food distribution network suddenly stopped operating. Several rural villages reported shortages. Aid shipments disappeared. Volunteers lacked instructions. Community leaders demanded answers. Again, Orion expected someone else to resolve it. Again, confusion followed. Finally, an elderly administrator rubbed his forehead and sighed. Her Majesty usually coordinates this. The room became silent. Orion frowned. All of it? The administrator blinked. Most of it? The answer felt impossible. Then the man opened several ledgers. Dozens of pages filled with notes, schedules, requests, correspondence. Every page carried Nerissa's handwriting. Every page. Orion stared at the records, slowly realizing the scale of what she managed. Not because anyone ordered her to, because someone needed to. And apparently, she had been that someone. For years, the pattern repeated itself endlessly. Provincial disputes, educational programs, infrastructure grants, agricultural partnerships. Everywhere Orion looked, he discovered another system quietly held together by his wife. The deeper he searched, the worse it became. One afternoon, a regional governor arrived, demanding clarification on a water rights agreement. The governor looked confused, then increasingly concerned. Finally, he asked, "When is the Luna returning?" Orion didn't answer immediately. Because he didn't know. The governor shifted uncomfortably. She negotiated this entire arrangement. Silence. Nobody else understands how it works. The words lingered long after the meeting ended, because they weren't unusual anymore. Every day revealed another hidden responsibility, another unseen burden, another piece of the kingdom operating because Nerissa made it operate. The realization followed him home, into meetings, into meals, into every quiet moment. Eventually, even the palace staff began speaking differently, not critically, not deliberately, simply, honestly. The Luna usually handled that. The Luna would know. The Luna already solved this last year. The comments accumulated, small individually, devastating together, because for the first time, Orion was seeing the full picture, not the public role, not the ceremonies, not the titles, the work, the endless, invisible work. And the worst part? Nerissa never demanded recognition for any of it. She simply carried it, year after year, while he assumed everything functioned naturally. One evening, Orion sat alone inside the royal study. A mountain of reports covered his desk. Problems, requests, questions, issues Nerissa would have resolved before they ever reached him. His gaze drifted toward the empty chair beside the fireplace, the chair she always used. A strange ache settled inside his chest, because the kingdom wasn't falling apart because Nerissa left. The kingdom was struggling because it had forgotten how much she was doing while she was here, including him, especially him. For the first time since the Moon Gala, Orion stopped focusing on the scandal, stopped thinking about Celeste, stopped wondering whether Nerissa would calm down and return. Instead, he confronted a far more uncomfortable possibility. What if she didn't come back? The thought lingered, heavy, persistent, terrifying. And for the first time, the Alpha King began searching for his wife. Not because he needed the Luna, because he missed Nerissa. The search began quietly. Orion told himself it was temporary, a practical decision, nothing more. He simply wanted to know where Nerissa was, to ensure she was safe, to give her time. That was what he told his advisors, what he told the council, what he told himself. Unfortunately, the truth became harder to ignore with each passing month. He wasn't searching because of duty. He was searching because every corner of the kingdom reminded him of her. Every successful program carried her fingerprints. Every functioning alliance revealed another contribution he had never noticed, and every night he returned to an empty palace wing. The silence had become unbearable. Months passed. No trace, no letters, no official sightings, nothing. It was as though Nerissa had stepped beyond the kingdom's reach and vanished. The uncertainty settled beneath Orion's skin. Persistent, uncomfortable, constant. Meanwhile, another realization arrived, one he had spent years avoiding. Celeste wasn't the answer to his unhappiness. She never had been. At first, he tried convincing himself otherwise. After all, hadn't he spent years wondering what might have happened if she never left? Hadn't he imagined different outcomes, different futures, different choices? The problem was that imagination rarely survives contact with reality. The woman standing before him now wasn't the woman he remembered, nor should she have been. 7 years had passed. People changed. Lives moved forward. Dreams evolved. The memory he carried belonged to the past. The actual person belonged to the present. And the gap between those two things was enormous. One evening, Celeste found him staring absent-mindedly through a palace window. The sun had already set. Most of the castle slept. The Alpha King looked exhausted. She recognized the expression immediately, because she wore it herself once. "You still think about her." The observation wasn't bitter, just honest. Orion didn't bother denying it. "There isn't much point pretending otherwise." Celeste smiled sadly. "No." Silence settled between them. Comfortable, understanding. Then she surprised him. "You know," she said softly, "I think you've spent years mourning the wrong woman." Orion frowned. "What does that mean?" Celeste looked toward the darkened gardens. "The woman you kept wondering about never existed." The words landed gently, yet they struck with remarkable precision. Because she was right. The life he imagined, the future he imagined, the version of events he occasionally revisited. None of it was real, only possibilities. Meanwhile, reality stood beside him every day for 11 years, and he never fully appreciated it. By spring, the realization had become impossible to escape. Nerissa wasn't competing with Celeste. She had been competing with a fantasy, a future that existed nowhere except inside his own mind. And eventually, she grew tired of losing to something that wasn't even real. The truth haunted him. Then, nearly a year after the Moon Gala, a merchant caravan arrived from the Southern Territories. The report seemed ordinary at first. Economic growth, improved trade, new agricultural partnerships, successful infrastructure projects. Then, Orion noticed a familiar pattern. The same villages appeared repeatedly, the same regions, the same names. Every success seemed connected to a single local advisor, a woman, respected, trusted, remarkably effective. His pulse quickened. Slowly, he turned the page and found the name, Nerissa Veilhart. For a moment, the room disappeared. He read it again, then a third time, as though the letters might rearrange themselves. They didn't. The report continued. Businesses expanding, communities prospering, regional, conflicts decreasing. Everywhere she went, conditions improved. The details sounded painfully familiar, because she was doing exactly what she always did: helping, building, leading. The only difference was that now she was doing it somewhere else, somewhere without him. Orion closed the report, then stood. The decision arrived instantly. Not because he was a king, not because he wanted answers, not because he hoped to change her mind, because after nearly a year of searching, he finally knew where she was. And for the first time since she handed back her ring, he had a chance to see her again. The Southern Territories were nothing like the capital. Orion noticed that immediately. Gone were the towering palace walls. Gone were the endless council meetings. Gone were the carefully choreographed performances of noble society. Instead, rolling vineyards stretched across the hills. Olive groves lined the roads. Small villages bustled with activity. The air carried the scent of earth, salt, and sunlight. Everything felt simpler, more honest, and somehow that made Orion uneasy, because the further he traveled, the more stories he heard. Stories about Nerissa, not Luna Nerissa, not Her Majesty, just Nerissa, the woman who helped rebuild irrigation systems after a drought, the woman who negotiated fair contracts between farmers and merchants, the woman who personally funded a school when local officials failed to act. Every village had a story, every town had a memory, and every person who spoke about her smiled. The realization stung. Not because he was jealous, because these people saw exactly what he should have appreciated years ago. A farmer outside one village laughed when Orion asked about her. "You mean Lady Nerissa?" The older man adjusted his hat. Best thing that happened to this region. Orion forced a smile. Is that so? The farmer nodded immediately. She listens. Such a simple answer. Yet somehow it struck harder than any criticism, because listening had always been one of Nerissa's strengths, a strength he frequently benefited from, without noticing. The journey continued. Each stop revealed the same pattern: prosperity, growth, trust. People respected her here, not because of a title, because she earned it. And perhaps that was the part that unsettled him most. She wasn't surviving after leaving the palace. She was thriving. The distinction mattered. For months, a selfish part of him imagined finding her lonely, perhaps even regretful. Not miserable. He never wished that. But maybe uncertain. Maybe still looking back. The reality proved very different. Nerissa wasn't looking backward at all. She was moving forward, confidently, successfully, without him. The truth became impossible to ignore when Orion finally saw her. It happened late one afternoon. The road curved around a hillside, overlooking a valley. Below sat a thriving vineyard. Workers moved between rows of grapes. Merchants loaded wagons. Families gathered beneath shaded terraces. The entire place radiated life. At the center of it all stood Nerissa. For a moment, Orion forgot how to breathe. Nearly a year had passed, yet he recognized her instantly. Not because she looked the same, because she didn't. Something had changed. The constant tension he never noticed before was gone. The quiet exhaustion. The invisible weight she carried. Gone. She laughed at something a worker said. A genuine laugh. Unrestrained. Easy. Orion couldn't remember the last time he heard that sound. The realization hurt more than he expected, because it forced him to confront a painful possibility. Maybe she hadn't found happiness after leaving him. Maybe she found happiness because she left. The thought settled heavily in his chest. Below, Nerissa continued speaking with several vineyard managers. They listened attentively, not because they had to, because they wanted to. The respect was obvious, natural, earned. Eventually, she glanced toward the hillside and saw him. The laughter faded. The conversation stopped. For a brief moment, neither moved. The distance between them suddenly felt much larger than a valley. Months of silence, years of disappointment, a marriage left unfinished, all standing between them. Yet Nerissa didn't look surprised, almost as if she had always known this moment would come eventually. She excused herself from the group, then began walking toward a path leading up the hill, toward him, toward the conversation both of them knew was unavoidable. By the time she reached the overlook, the sun was beginning to set. Golden light spilled across the vineyards. The ocean shimmered in the distance. The scene looked almost unfairly beautiful, as though nature itself refused to acknowledge the tension hanging between them. Nerissa stopped a few feet away, calm, composed, at peace. Orion stared at her, searching for the right words, finding none, because suddenly every prepared speech felt useless, every apology felt inadequate, and every regret felt painfully obvious. For the first time since she left, they stood face to face. Not as king and Luna, not as ruler and queen, just two people, one who had finally chosen herself, and one who was only beginning to understand why. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The wind moved gently through the vineyard. Rows of grapevines stretched toward the horizon. Beyond them, the ocean reflected the orange glow of the setting sun. It should have been peaceful. Instead, Orion felt as though he were standing before a verdict. Nerissa waited quietly, not impatient, not hostile, simply allowing him the space to say whatever he had traveled across the kingdom to say. The problem was that he no longer knew where to begin. The speeches he rehearsed during the journey sounded foolish now, too polished, too rehearsed, too late. Finally, he settled for honesty. "You look happy." The words escaped before he could stop them. Nerissa blinked, then smiled faintly. "That's an unusual way to start a conversation." Orion almost laughed. Almost. Instead, he rubbed a hand across the back of his neck, a gesture she remembered well. He only did that when he felt uncomfortable. "I had a different speech prepared." And it sounded terrible. That actually earned a small laugh from her. The sound caught him off guard, because it reminded him of earlier years, before distance settled between them, before everything became complicated. The moment passed quickly. Silence returned. This time, Orion forced himself to continue. "I owe you an apology." Nerissa's expression softened slightly, not because she was surprised, because she had probably expected it. The Alpha King looked toward the ocean, unable to meet her eyes for a moment. "I should have noticed." The confession came quietly, yet it felt heavier than anything else he had said. Nerissa didn't respond immediately. Orion continued. "The dinners," a pause. "The promises," another. "The way I kept assuming there would always be time later." His voice grew quieter. "I should have noticed." The words lingered between them. Honest, painfully honest. For once, he wasn't defending himself, wasn't explaining, wasn't offering excuses, only acknowledging. Nerissa folded her arms loosely. The ocean breeze tugged at a few strands of hair. For a long moment, she simply studied him, as though trying to decide whether the man standing before her was finally seeing what had always been there. Eventually, she nodded. "You should have." The answer wasn't cruel. That made it hurt more, because she wasn't trying to punish him. She was simply telling the truth, the same truth she had lived with for years. Below them, workers continued moving through the vineyard. Life carried on, unaffected by royal regrets, unaffected by old heartbreak. The normalcy felt strangely comforting. Orion glanced toward the bustling valley. "You built something remarkable here." Nerissa followed his gaze. A small smile appeared, one filled with quiet pride. "People built it together. You led them." The correction arrived immediately, because he had spent months reading reports, listening to stories, following the trail she left behind. He knew exactly how much of the region's success traced back to her. Nerissa looked away. The compliment seemed to make her uncomfortable, or perhaps she simply wasn't accustomed to hearing it. That realization bothered him more than it should, because she deserved recognition, far more than she ever received. Another silence settled between them. Not hostile, not awkward, simply thoughtful. The kind that existed when two people shared a history too large to fit into ordinary conversation. Finally, Orion asked the question that had haunted him for nearly a year, the question he couldn't stop asking himself, the question he desperately needed answered. "Why didn't you fight for us?" The words left his mouth before he could reconsider them. Nerissa turned slowly. For a moment, she simply stared. Then, something unexpected happened. She laughed, not bitterly, not mockingly, sadly, as though she couldn't quite believe he still didn't understand. The sound unsettled him immediately, because it wasn't the reaction he expected, or perhaps feared. Then her laughter faded. The vineyard grew quiet, and Nerissa finally answered, not with an explanation, not with an accusation, with a question, a single question, one so simple that it shattered every defense he still carried. She looked directly into his eyes and asked, "Why was I the only one supposed to?" The words hit like a physical blow. And suddenly, for the first time since arriving in the South, Orion realized this conversation was about to become far more difficult than he imagined. Why was I the only one supposed to? The question lingered in the evening air. Simple, quiet, devastating. Orion opened his mouth, then closed it, because every answer that came to mind sounded wrong, defensive, self-serving, incomplete. For years, he had imagined this reunion, imagined explaining himself, imagined earning forgiveness. What he never imagined was discovering he had never truly understood the problem. Nerissa watched him struggle, not with satisfaction, not with anger, only with the calm patience of someone who had already spent years thinking about the answer. The vineyard below them glowed beneath the fading sunlight. Workers drifted home. Lanterns slowly illuminated the paths between the vines. Life continued, while Orion stood motionless beneath the weight of a single question. Eventually, Nerissa spoke again. "I spent years fighting for us." Her voice remained gentle. That somehow made every word sharper. "I rearranged my schedule when yours became overwhelming." She looked toward the horizon. "I canceled plans when emergencies came up." A pause. "I accepted apologies when promises were forgotten." Another. "I kept telling myself things would improve." Orion lowered his gaze, because every example carried a memory, and every memory was true. The worst part wasn't that she was exaggerating. The worst part was that she wasn't. Nerissa continued, "I understood that being king was difficult." The statement contained no sarcasm, no accusation, just fact. "I understood long nights." A pause. "I understood responsibility." Another. "I understood sacrifice." Then she finally looked at him, directly. "And because I understood all those things, I kept making excuses for you." The words landed heavily, because he remembered every missed anniversary, every canceled dinner, every postponed conversation. She always understood, always forgave, always adjusted. At the time, he viewed those moments as evidence of a strong marriage. Now he saw them differently. He saw a woman carrying the relationship while he assumed it would continue moving forward on its own, like a cart rolling downhill. No effort required, no maintenance needed, until eventually the wheels fell off. Nerissa folded her hands before her. "The problem wasn't that you made mistakes." Orion looked up. A flicker of hope appeared, then disappeared just as quickly, because her next words cut deeper. "The problem was that I was the only one worried about fixing them." Silence. The truth settled between them, unavoidable, painfully clear. For years, whenever distance appeared, Nerissa bridged it. Whenever communication failed, she restarted it. Whenever problems surfaced, she addressed them. Meanwhile, Orion simply assumed there would always be another opportunity, another conversation, another chance. The certainty had become dangerous, because certainty often turns gratitude into expectation, and expectation into neglect. The realization struck with brutal force. He hadn't intentionally taken her for granted. That didn't make the result any different. Nerissa sighed softly. The sound carried exhaustion older than their separation, older than Celeste's return, perhaps older than either of them realized. "I wasn't asking for perfection." The statement surprised him, because somewhere deep down, he suspected that was exactly what he failed to provide. Nerissa shook her head slightly, as though reading the thought. "I never needed perfection." Her gaze softened. "I needed a partner." The simplicity of the statement shattered something inside him, because she was right. Not once had she demanded impossible standards. Not once had she expected him to be flawless. She only wanted to feel chosen, important, prioritized. And suddenly, Orion couldn't remember the last time he intentionally made her feel that way. The memory terrified him, not because it was absent, because it took so long to find. The sky darkened, stars began appearing overhead. The vineyard lights flickered warmly below. Nerissa watched them quietly, then asked one final question, a question even more devastating than the first. "When did you choose us?" Orion froze. The answer should have been easy. A husband should know. A king should know. Anyone should know. Yet as he searched through years of memories, he found celebrations, victories, responsibilities, meetings, plans, promises, but that specific answer remained painfully elusive. When had he actively chosen them? When had he fought for their marriage the way she did? When had he stopped assuming and started showing? The silence stretched. Longer, longer, longer. And for the first time in a very long time, Orion Blackthorn had no answer. Orion never answered the question. Not that evening. Not the next morning. Not at any point during the remainder of his stay in the Southern Territories. Because every answer he considered felt dishonest. The truth was painfully simple. He couldn't remember, and that realization hurt more than any accusation Nerissa could have made. A marriage lasting 11 years should have provided countless examples, moments of effort, moments of sacrifice, moments where he deliberately chose them. Yet when he searched his memories, most of what he found were assumptions. The assumption she would understand. The assumption she would forgive. The assumption she would remain. The assumptions had felt harmless at the time. Now they looked like the foundation of everything he lost. For several days, he remained in the South. Not because he expected a miracle, not because he thought Nerissa would suddenly return with him. Simply because he wasn't ready to leave. During those days, he observed the life she built. The vineyard workers greeted her warmly each morning. Merchants sought her advice. Village leaders trusted her judgment. Children ran toward her without hesitation. Everywhere she went, people smiled. Not because she held power, because she made their lives better. Watching her felt strangely familiar. Then, Orion finally understood why. She had always been this person, even in the capital, even beside the throne. The difference was that here, people noticed, here, her work wasn't hidden beneath royal ceremonies. Here, nobody assumed she would quietly solve problems forever. Here, she received the appreciation she deserved. The realization left him both proud and ashamed. Proud of the woman she was, ashamed that he needed to lose her before fully seeing it. One evening, shortly before his departure, he found Nerissa walking among the vineyards. The sun was setting, painting the sky gold and crimson. For a while, they walked together in silence. The quiet felt easier now, not because their problems disappeared, because the truth no longer needed defending. Eventually, Orion stopped. Nerissa turned toward him, waiting, patient, the way she always had. He reached into his coat pocket, slowly, carefully, then opened his hand. The Luna ring rested in his palm, gold catching the fading sunlight. For a moment, neither spoke. The sight carried too many memories. 11 years, a lifetime of moments compressed into a single object. Orion looked at the ring, then at Nerissa. "I carried this every day." His voice was quiet, almost reflective. Nerissa's expression softened, just slightly. The Alpha King closed his fingers around the ring, not offering it back, not asking her to take it, simply holding it. "I thought finding you would give me a chance to fix everything. A faint smile touched his lips. Tired, honest. I was wrong. Nerissa remained silent, allowing him to continue. The ocean breeze drifted through the vineyard, carrying the scent of earth and salt. For once, Orion didn't rush to fill the silence. Instead, he accepted it, accepted the consequences, accepted the reality, accepted that some lessons arrive too late. Finally, he nodded, more to himself than to her. You were never asking me to choose between you and Celeste. The realization felt strangely freeing, because it revealed the true problem at last. Nerissa hadn't left because another woman returned. She left because she grew tired of competing with a future that never existed. A memory, a possibility, an unfinished fantasy, and perhaps worst of all, a fantasy Orion never fully released. Nerissa looked toward the horizon, the last rays of sunlight disappearing beyond the sea. Then she smiled, a genuine smile, peaceful, certain, the smile of a woman who no longer questioned her place in the world. For the first time, Orion understood it completely. He had spent years believing the tragedy was that she left. The real tragedy was that she had already been leaving emotionally for years, and he never noticed. The next morning, Orion returned to the capital alone. The Luna ring remained in his possession, not as a symbol of hope, not as a promise, but as a reminder. Years later, people still spoke about the Royal Moon Gala, not because of politics, not because of Celeste, not even because of the scandal. They remembered the ring that rested in the Alpha King's palm long after the ballroom emptied, the ring he never gave to another woman, and the lesson attached to it. Love does not disappear in a single moment. It fades through neglect, through assumptions, through believing someone will always stay. Nerissa didn't leave because she stopped loving. She left because she finally loved herself enough to stop waiting. The Alpha King expected a fight. Instead, she gave him something much more final, agreement. She handed back her ring and walked away. By the time he realized what he had taken for granted, she had already built a life where she never had to question her place again.